Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's event. This is Understanding 2020 Community Cohesion. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us. This is the third in a series of fortnightly events we've run, and we've got two fantastic guests today with us. I'm really excited. Before we begin, and for those attending today, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are on today, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, as well as the traditional owners of the land you are situated on, and acknowledge that Indigenous Australians have been custodians of the land and waterways of Australia for thousands of years. So we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And we thank you all for joining us. So my name is Garry Williams and I'm the creative producer of innovation at Melbourne Connect, which is part of the University of Melbourne. And I'll be delivering this event for you today as I do many others. This event series, Understanding 2020, is a collaboration between Melbourne Connect and the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences based at University of Melbourne. So these fortnightly online events are essentially designed to delve into a range of topics focused on very current and relevant feelings, emotions, relevant to the current context we find ourselves in, particularly pertinent to COVID-19. So we're utilising these events as a platform to discuss evidence-based research and societal trends. And we're bringing together leading psychologists and people from industry who are going to drive the thought-provoking discussions and basically unearth these themes that are present across many of us that we're discussing at length. So I'm just going to show just a few slides and then I'll essentially do the service for our speakers today of introducing them so they don't have to. And then we're going to run into the presentation element. So we'll do some presentations from each of our speakers, some Q&A where you'll be able to participate. We'll even have a poll for today, which will be a new addition to our interactive element. And then from there, we'll have further Q&A at the end and end it promptly at 1:30 p.m. So let me just share my screen just for a little context of what Melbourne Connect is. So you should be able to see that full screen at the moment. So we're here for community cohesion. And our speakers today, very excitingly, is Dr. Cassandra Hayward and Dr. Avent. So thank you very much and more on them in just 1 second. Melbourne Connect is an emerging innovation precinct which will launch on the corner of Swanston and Grattan Street at the end of this year. It's essentially a massive structure which is located on the site of the old Royal Women's Hospital. And it's fundamentally a place for us to gather, very focused on emerging technologies, societal trends and more. It's located within Melbourne Connect will be the Melbourne School of Engineering, Melbourne Accelerator Program, one of the global nodes of the Science Gallery network, Science Gallery Melbourne, which is incredibly exciting, and then also co-working, Fab Lab, Makerspace and much more. And that includes events in which we can gather just like the one you're present at today, except obviously offline. So this is some examples of what Melbourne Connect will look like when in operation. And these are some examples of the places in which we'll gather and have discussions such as these. Beautiful open space that people can access freely. And as you can see, it's a hybrid mixture of engagement, gathering and more. There'll be 3,500 people in the building at capacity and we're very, very excited to unveil it. So more on that a little later. But we're here for Understanding 2020. And today we're going to have a discussion about how our communities respond to times that require increased mental resilience, such as right now, obviously. So we'll address the light and dark side of community cohesion, so ostracism and exclusion versus social cohesion and connection. And our two speakers will take turns in honing in on these distinct perspectives. So our first speaker today, Cassie, I'm going to do the introductions for you as well as you, Kathy. But feel free to, elaborate as you dive into it, in case I've missed anything important, of course. So Dr. Cassie Hayward is a senior lecturer in psychology at the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Melbourne. She's the convener of the Master of Applied Psychology, which is designed for psychology graduates who want to develop practical skills in the applications of psychology to the world of business, government, the not-profit sector, marketing, consumer and social research, and health. So her academic research has concentrated on the use of non-conscious attitude measurement tools, such as ostracism, negotiation, juror decision-making, and the framing of inequity. So really excited to hear this presentation. And our second speaker today is Dr. Avent. She's the General Manager of Social Innovation and Impact at the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. She joined Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation as the new GM of Social Innovation and Impact this year in January, and her role includes managing the Foundation's grants and impact team to support the collaborative development of innovative solutions to tough social and environmental challenges in the Greater Melbourne region. So a key focus of her role is demonstrating and maximising the impact of the Foundation's grants and initiatives, and she has extensive experience in managing long-term multidisciplinary collaborations between institutions such as universities, throughout industry, and of course not-for-profits. So look, we're really excited to have you. I'm not going to labour the point and talk too much. It's about yourselves and the presentation we'll be hearing today. I'm going to exit the screen share and come back to some further details later. But just to reiterate for everyone how this is running today, we're going to have two people presenting with Q&A interjected throughout. We're going to 1:30 p.m. maximum, and we're recording this conversation. So we'll publish this out on YouTube just after the completion so that you can dive back into the content produced. Kathy, I've mentioned already, we're going to have a poll today as well. So I believe people can see that poll. Yep. And they're already starting to respond. So for anyone who's engaged with the poll function, or haven't, I should say, you can see that at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Do check in and feel free to select what you think is the most appropriate answer. And we'll address these ones and highlight to you what is the actual answer as part of Kathy's talk. So I'm sort of out of breath, so I may as well put myself off to the side and let yourselves take over. But welcome to you both. Thank you very much for participating today.
All right. So thank you, everyone. I look forward to doing one of these in that cool new building that looks amazing. But for now, we'll do it on Zoom and see how we go. So just to follow up, Garry mentioned that I'm the convener of the Master of Applied Psychology, where we look at how psychology can have an input into real world problems. Our connection with Kathy is that some of our students are actually doing a group project for the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation at the moment on a topic that relates to social cohesion. So I convinced her to come along to this session today. So thank you to Kathy. Just to give you a little bit of a introduction to what we'll be doing today. The topic is on social cohesion, and Kathy will talk about what the Lord Mayor's Foundation is doing in that space. And although ostracism is not just, that social cohesion is not just the absence of being ostracised, we thought it would be useful to take a step back and look at some of the basic psychological research around ostracism and exclusion as kind of a baseline for why social cohesion is so important in a community at any time, but particularly in times like this when we're kind of forced into a bit of exclusion and isolation as well. So I'll kick off with a little bit of recap of research around ostracism and exclusion, and then I'll hand over to Kathy to do the kind of lighter side of social cohesion and why it's so important, and the work that the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation is doing in that space. For our purposes today, we'll be talking about ostracism in the same kind of definition as being ignored and being excluded. There's slightly different definitions for all of those terms, but for our purposes today, we'll be looking at that as a whole. So it's any kind of example of where you're excluded from a group or from a relationship. Kip Williams, who has done decades of research on this topic, is now at Purdue University in the US, but has a great book on just the pervasiveness of ostracism. And it's not just something that humans do, although we do it quite well. You can see ostracism in animals, so lions and wolves and even bees have been shown to use ostracism techniques or exclusion techniques. You see it in children, you see it within tribes, you certainly see it as a punishment in certain institutions. And obviously as part of relationships as well. So you probably all know either as the receiver or the giver of something like the silent treatment. My favourite there is the noisy silent treatment, where you kind of slam doors and make sure that the other person is very aware that you're giving them the silent treatment. And you know, we can make some jokes about that, but it can be a real, a very serious impact on relationships, whether it be one-on-one relationships or group relationships. And it in the book that Kip has written on ostracism, there's examples of, couples who've had years and years of literally not talking to each other. So it can be a very debilitating experience to go through from a relationships perspective, but zooming out to a group level, you can see those negative impacts on a society level as well. When you look at why ostracism is so kind of painful to us, the research shows that it really threatens these 4 basic fundamental human needs. So our sense of our need for belonging is our need to kind of feel connected and engaged with other people. That takes a hit when we're ostracised or excluded. Self-esteem is, at a basic level, our need to kind of feel positive about ourselves, and that takes a hit when we're ostracised. Control, so our need to feel like we have some control over our experiences and our interactions, and that gets taken away when someone else is controlling our relationship by excluding us from an interaction or an experience. And the need of meaningful existence, so our kind of desire to feel like there's something bigger, that we're important, and that we're useful to something more. And again, that takes a hit when we experience ostracism. But there's a kind of a bigger question here in why we do it. If we know how much it hurts when we get ostracised, why is it something that's kind of continued as an activity? And there's an evolutionary argument that it is something that, as humans evolved, ostracism was quite a useful tactic to kind of keep your group in line. So if a member of a group was doing something that was disadvantageous to the group, they would be banished. And you can think from an evolutionary perspective, our ancestors, it would have been quite dangerous for them to be kicked out of their group and have to survive in the savannah by themselves. So from an evolutionary perspective, there is an argument that it is a tactic that has evolved as we've evolved as a species, as a way to maintain that social connection and continue as a group. And it can strengthen and bond the group that does the ostracism, so they can end up actually feeling stronger and more connected as a result of actually banishing someone. So there's an evolutionary argument for why it has continued today, even though we know how much it hurts when it happens to us. Interestingly, Kip Williams has done some work with Naomi Eisenberger looking at the impact of being ostracised on what happens in our brain when we're ostracised. And the same part of the brain that kind of detects physical pain is the part that is active when we're experiencing ostracism as well. So these, the terminology of, it hurts and these kind of pain descriptors that we use when we're ostracised does seem to have some basis in what really is going on in our brain when we're ostracised. Even though our prehistoric ancestors didn't have to deal with Twitter or SMS, it seems that their experience and how they've prepared us for coping with ostracism or experiencing ostracism translates to our modern online world, in that even if we're ignored in an online capacity, so either through SMS or a chat room or email or a computer game, it can hurt just as much as being ignored in those face-to-face environments. So research that we did back in the early 2000s, when SMS was just kind of a new thing, and back when I was a Govern and not a Hayward, we saw that people who were ostracised in these online experiences felt the same impacts on those 4 fundamental needs of belonging, control, self-esteem, meaningful existence in that online experience. There was some evidence in that research that the anonymity of some of these online environments creates a kind of virtual bravado for people to speak up and kind of question the person who's ostracising them, and that can buffer some of those threats to self-esteem and control, but certainly not to belonging and meaningful existence. So it still hurts when you're ostracised in those online environments, but the level of impact on those different needs can vary a little depending on how you're able to kind of question or have some reaction to the ostracism, which you don't often get in a face-to-face environment. What's really interesting, though, is how early we are to detect ostracism and how likely we are to react to it, even when we're told that it's nothing that we've done wrong. So in this research, this was headed up by Lisa Zadro, they told participants in the experiments that they were interacting with a computer, that the computer is going to be programmed to leave them out of a game. So it's nothing that you've done. It's just we're testing some things and we want to see, we've told the computer that you're interacting in this game, but you're never going to get the ball thrown to you in this kind of virtual ball tossing game. So even when we're told that it's not a person on the other side of this game, that it's just a computer, and it's programmed to leave you out of the game, we still get this hit to our fundamental needs, so those 4 needs that we talked about. And the pattern looks almost identical to when you're being excluded by a person, when you can kind of make the potential argument that it's something you've done wrong. So even when we know that it's a computer who's leaving us out and the computer's programmed to leave us out, we still feel bad when we're left out. And it gets even weirder when you look at this research. This was looking at whether there's a difference in who ostracises or excludes you, and whether we see a difference in our reaction to ostracism as a function of who's doing the exclusion. So if you think of in-groups and out-groups, so an in-group is someone that we have, a group that we have some connection to. In this example, it was people from the same university. We see the pattern of ostracism mirroring other experiments of ostracism, that when we're included, we feel good. When we're excluded, we feel bad. When you look at what happens when the people excluding you are an out-group, we still get the same pattern. So even though we might not necessarily like these people or feel any connection with these people or even want to belong to their group, we still feel bad when they leave us out. But to make this one even weirder, this experiment looked at what happened when people thought that the group that was excluding them, in this case a kind of virtual ball tossing game, they thought that those people were members of the KKK. So even in a despised out-group, so a group that we really had no desire to belong to or have any association with, even when they ignore and exclude us, it still makes us feel bad. So this was part of a series of studies that was looking at, can we find an example or a scenario where being ostracised and excluded doesn't hurt? And they just can't seem to find that example of when an experience of being excluded doesn't hurt. So in this scenario, even interacting with people that you would have no desire at all to be part of or connect with, it still hurt when they left you out of the activity. They've done other research looking at where, you might be interacting in this kind of virtual ball tossing game and it's actually advantageous to be excluded. So it might be that you get more points for the fewer times that you get the ball. Sometimes they've even made the little ball look like a little ticking time bomb and you lose the game if you're holding it. So in those scenarios, it's actually advantageous to you as a player in the game to not get the ball, and yet we still feel bad when we're excluded. So that all of these studies were kind of looking at where's the point where being ostracised doesn't hurt, and they still can't really find an example of when we're kind of unaffected by being excluded. So that's kind of a summary of the kind of basic research in ostracism. But I wanted to finish my little section before I hand off to Kathy to something that's kind of relevant to today's society in terms of the negative side effects of being excluded can lead us to stay with questionable groups or stick with unproven facts in a bid to kind of maintain or obtain our sense of belonging. So you see these groups like anti-vaxxers and alt-right groups, and particularly fractured in the US political scene. And, you often get people trying to, for example, talk to anti-vaxxers around the science of vaccines and convince them with facts and evidence as a way to change their mind. And it doesn't seem to work. And it doesn't work because that's not necessarily why they're sticking with their beliefs. It's because they get such a sense of belonging from their group. So a really fascinating, if anyone's interested in this, I've put a link here to a podcast episode called Samantha's Journey to the Alt-Right and Back. And it's a really fascinating look at a woman's kind of journey from, being a fairly left-leaning high school and university student, and yet ending up quite high in a pretty terrible alt-right group in the US who was responsible for some horrific violence. And she, spoiler alert, she comes out and gets out of that group. But the way she talks about what drew her to that group, and how she kind of ended up just progressing and being part of that group, was really captured in this quote that I've put up here, when she says, "I didn't go in for racism, I didn't go in for politics, I went in because I was insecure and it made me feel good about myself." And that really highlights some of the dangers of when people are feeling excluded or disconnected from society, how they can find that sense of belonging from groups that might not be very good for them or anyone else. But it all comes down to maintaining this sense of belonging that is really at the heart of what we're all kind of looking for. And these people are finding it in kind of questionable or dangerous groups. And talking to them about facts and evidence is not necessarily all we need to get them out of those groups or to change those beliefs, because it's not really about the facts or the evidence. It's really about this strong sense of belonging that they get from being part of those groups.
So let's address with your talk. So obviously you've mentioned about 4 basic needs threatened by ostracism, so belonging, self-esteem, control, and meaningful existence. You referenced at the end about some very current factors, but how about how your research, which has been over a long period of time for a number of years, has been substantially influenced or validated, particularly in the last couple of months? Do you want to talk about how you've, reevaluated hypotheses or existing research out there in line with what's happened in society of late?
I think what we've seen is just how important those needs are when people are forced to kind of self-isolate or have social distancing, and you see people try and kind of recreate those interactions in an online environment. And as we're seeing here, you don't get that same level of connection when we're on Zoom. And so I think what we've found is that as people are in these kind of social isolation times, they still try and connect with people, and they still try and maintain those 4 needs of belonging, control, self-esteem, and meaningful existence. But what we're finding is that, and I think everyone has had these experiences where, you can get the fundamentals and the basics done through Zoom or through online learning. At the university this semester, we've transitioned very quickly to online learning. And so you can get the fundamentals done in those scenarios, but I'm sure everybody would agree that there is something kind of missing when it comes to feeling like you're connected with people when all you have is, Zoom meetings or FaceTime or video calls. Obviously, technology steps in and creates some barriers, but even when technology is perfect, it just doesn't feel the same. There's that little lag in time. You don't get the kind of same sense of body language and connection. People, the kind of, now that people are moving around a little bit more, you still get that weird scenario where people kind of, step back and don't like to come forward. So I think all the kind of coronavirus isolation has shown us is how important it is to maintain those feelings of connection with people, and that even though we might be able to get the fundamentals of learning and working done in online environments, that it just doesn't necessarily translate to a full sense of belonging. From a marketing sense, you see brands try and step in and say, we're here for you. So even from an advertising sense, you get this very strong message from brands trying to connect and trying to maintain that sense of belonging with their customers or potential customers. And that can sometimes feel a little bit kind of awkward from brands who might not necessarily have any reason to say that they're here for us or that they're doing something for us or that we're all in this together. But it's just this kind of need for us to feel like we're saying something and doing something. But yeah, look, I think all the scenario of isolation and social distancing has done is to really reiterate how important genuine connection and a sense of belonging is, and how all of the hypotheses and experience and outcomes from the ostracism research, I think, is just reiterated in our current environment of how much we really need a genuine sense of belonging and connection.
Certainly. I will hone in on these community facts, especially some particulars around definition of community, I guess, which as you mentioned, some brands has also come to the fore a little bit, I guess, as that reactive element to the situation we find in and trying to enhance brand loyalty. Before I do, Kathy, how are you going?
Thanks, Gary, and I'm very pleased to be able to be here today. I'll just get my slides going, but yes, I started as the General Manager, Social Innovation and Impact at the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation right at the end of January, so I just had my 4-month anniversary, so it's been quite an introduction of a very challenging start to 2020. So I'll just get my organisation things right and share my screen. That may be a game changer in the sector. And so those things are really projects that are looking to make system change, not just incremental or slightly increased service delivery. A community leader understanding and tackling the priority issues in the community, and also a role in inspiring philanthropy for people who, particularly those who want to have a bit more control over if they're donating to things and how they want their donations to be allocated. So we have 5 impact areas. There's 4 that I'll speak around today, and they're grouped in themes which cover a large degree of the issues that we're looking to try and support and improve. So homelessness and affordable housing, education and employment, environment and sustainability, healthy and resilient communities. And each of those impact areas are aligned with a UN Sustainable Development Goal. And so we're actually trying to look at our alignment in terms of our delivery of targets and our performance in alignment with those Sustainable Development Goals. So just to give a little bit of an insight, one of the publications and some of the work that we do is around, obviously we have to gather a lot of data to understand what are the issues facing Greater Melbourne, and part of that is gaining data from available sources. So we have a publication that we're syndicated licensed to produce, which is called Greater Melbourne Vital Signs. And we like to say it takes the pulse of our city. It gives a snapshot of the health and vitality and indicates the things that we can celebrate and the issues that we face. So we have some really nice sort of, if Melbourne were a group of 100 people, what would we look like? And there's various stats. Now, the information that I've got here at the moment, we're just working on a brief 2020 version, because obviously 2020 has been a slightly different year. But if we take a look at the 2017 report card, we can see examples of where there are fabulous things, excuse me, and there are lots of things that we can celebrate, but we capture this information and try and share it with people so that they understand the areas where we need to improve. So perhaps, Gary, if we've actually had the poll being completed, maybe we could actually take a look at that data now, because that would be quite interesting.
We do have the poll.
Yeah.
We do have it up there. So I'll leave my video off, but how would you like to run it? Would you like to read out the topic?
Yeah, so I'll just stop my, I could probably I've just not.
Let me do it. I'll read out the question and the I guess the percentage of who's chosen what in terms of the overwhelming response, and then maybe you can address it yourself. So the first question was, which extreme weather or natural disaster causes the most deaths in Australia? 76% of our people chose heat waves.
And that's fantastic because they would be correct. And so there's the evidence around heat waves is, you know, it's a lot more apparent and affects people who are in lower socioeconomic groups to a higher degree, and also people who have heat vulnerable health issues. And also there are consequences of housing that is not effectively insulated or with appropriate delivery of heating and cooling. So well done, everyone. That's a great outcome.
Great. And there will be, I guess, some surprising answers within these. If anyone is looking for that poll, it's in the bottom section of the Zoom call. You can also see within there, I'm guessing, the percentages of answers. Let's see, number 2, on average, how far ahead in their education are advantaged 15-year-old students compared to disadvantaged students? We've had 56% of people choose 2 years ahead.
Right. So how many people chose the other options, Garry?
So we've had 24% choose 3 years, 12% choose 1 year, and 9% choose 6 months.
So I was quite astounded by this. It's actually 3 years. So a 15-year-old in an advantaged household, so with all of the support and good income and all of the other parameters that surround that, the equivalent for a disadvantaged student is that they're actually, you know, the equivalent of 3 years behind. I found that really surprising in Australia and Melbourne in particular. And I think one of the things to take into account there is the disadvantaged communities that we're talking about also have, in the context of COVID and the pandemic, lower access to internet, lower digital inclusivity, so they're less able to interact with the communities. They don't have access to even the hardware, so a computer, and they don't have the home environment to actually be able to support them in their learning. So one of the things that is a priority for us to be looking at in the next, you know, particularly 12 months, but then the consequences beyond, is around students at the moment and the impact on their learning, given that we already know that it's a 3 years difference for 15-year-old students already.
Okay. All right. The third question was, an average person in Victoria produces greenhouse gas emissions that are, and we've had a relatively even spread. 38% have said that it's 2 times the global average. Mm-hmm. We've also had 29% say that it's equal to the global average. And we've had 24% say that it's 4 times the global average. No one believes, just a few people believe that is less than the global average. So again, the average person in Victoria produces greenhouse gas emissions that are, what will be the answer?
4 times the global average, Garry. So
wow.
Wow. So we have a bit of a way to go there. And again, I found this, you know, quite surprising when I first arrived at the foundation. And, you know, my background is in getting the collaborations together and actually sort of highlighting the issues and learning how to demonstrate the impact of things. So I was absolutely astounded when to think that, you know, we're 4 times the global average. So there are things that we can do and there are actions that we are taking. But I think that's one of the things that particularly we're endeavouring to do is actually bring that awareness to a broader group of the population, so that we can get the right voices and the right solutions in place and help improve that situation.
Yep, absolutely. I was certainly very, very surprised. So,
yeah.
Thank you for illustrating that. And our last question, look, this is a very even spread of responses. So I guess just outline the actual answer for us. Of those experiencing homelessness in Victoria, which age group is most prevalent? 12 to 24, 25 to 39, 40 to 55, or over 55-year-olds?
So the situation is, unfortunately, it's the 12 to 24-year-olds who are currently the highest population group likely to be experiencing homelessness, and they're actually they can be rough sleeping, or they're in very high density dwellings, so lots of share houses and things like that. So again, the access to all of the general life support and skills that we need isn't available to them. So they're a really vulnerable group as well. And again, this is data from before March this year. So there's a concern around the impact, of the pandemic. Although the response to supporting homelessness and affordable housing solutions has been quite good. I think about half the rough sleepers have been housed in temporary accommodation through hotels in Greater Melbourne at the moment. And there's lots of work being done on what's the long-term solution for that, and what are the systemic changes that we can make to actually reduce the impact of that and provide longer-term solutions. So I hope that's shared some interesting things to help people think about the challenges that we're facing. We, as a response to those, we actually have, so our granting strategy is around, we have both an open grant round, our innovation grant round, which would normally run in the latter half of of the year. But because of the pandemic, we've actually pushed that back to early next year, because we feel we need to be a little bit more responsive to what the needs of the sector are. So we're focusing for the second half of this year at the moment on our proactive granting, where we're actually working with organisations to identify what are the innovative opportunities presenting to us at the moment, and actually work them up collaboratively with our granting partner. And so we're fundamentally a partner in that project, doing co-design, advocacy, and using specialist communication strategies to actually, and also networking, utilising our network. So our program managers who operate across all of these impact areas are working on those. We have a hotspots initiative, and we have initiatives that are also looking at trying to address the housing and the heat waves issues. And so there's a lot of intersecting parts in this as well. So it's complicated to actually try and resolve these matters, because obviously, a person experiencing homelessness needs, they don't have a pillow they can put their head on every night. They may not know from one night to another where they're sleeping. I've put a link in here around Ozanam House, which is a project that LMCF supported. It's been 5 years in the sort of genesis, so it was funded in 2016 and was opened last year. And it really converted sort of the old Ozanam House into a new and dynamic model for supporting people experiencing homelessness, where it's a shift in providing the services around the client. And so Ozanam House has longer term living options. It's designed with respect and opportunities for the residents, and they have their own rooms and bathrooms. It's not shared bathrooms. It's really giving the people the dignity of their own place, and the long-term opportunities that result from that are We're still, they're long term to actually see the changes, but you can imagine that for someone who has never had a home, would make quite a big difference in even their ability to get a job, to have a friend over. It's something that it's just good to be able to find solutions to. But the challenge with those things is when they're projects that are changing the normal operating model, someone needs to be brave enough and bold enough to be the first supporter of the project to leverage other partnerships. And that's one of the things that LMCF likes to do and is known for doing. So it's one of the benefits of philanthropy. So 2020, we've had some very interesting and challenging circumstances. The challenges are only going to get greater. We're now, Greater Melbourne is home to 4.96 million people. That population is expected to increase to between 6.1 and 6.6 million by 2030. Housing prices are going up. Well, they have been. Who knows what's going to happen now? But a really challenging situation of, it requires 43% of an average household's income to service a mortgage in Greater Melbourne. And so even where it typically had been okay for people on an average income to actually be able to get into the property market, that's actually almost out of reach for a greater proportion of the population now. So that's another sort of exclusion issue. So the challenges are how do we overcome those things, and the solutions that we're looking to they're very often community driven and engaging with people more closely to actually get the solutions from people in the community and connected with services and support in a manner that supports the individual, not designed by the service provider. So just putting a little context, this was just released not long ago. It's around, the coronavirus is not gender blind, but it shows illustrates very well a variety of the intersecting components of our normal operating environment now with COVID-19 pandemic, and that coming on the back of the bushfires, which already placed a large number of groups under pressure. So I won't dwell on this, but the economic conditions, employment, livelihoods, the disadvantaged are disproportionately affected. And the information is already showing that also the jobs and environments and things that are being impacted even more are also disproportionately going to affect women more than men. So we might be a 97-year-old community foundation. We're still relevant and fabulous. The social inclusion, the role of the foundation is to try and find those solutions to help people overcome the challenges that they're facing. And we're trying to do that through novel solutions and with collaborations with organisations looking to make systemic change. So I'll leave it there. I'll stop the share, and maybe we're coming up to the end, so there might be some other questions that I'm not sure. That was the cohesion. Obviously the social cohesion is a really challenging part, and the solutions, how we measure that, how we demonstrate that through our granting partners is challenging.
Look, I can probably dovetail straight into that, being that I've got a couple of things to address. One is around the community consultation piece. So both of you would have different elements of, I guess, engaging to proffer up the research statistics on which you lean. But then also I might address, I guess, maybe something which is more part of the narrative of late. Some people have been expressing that they've been enjoying our time at the moment in terms of connecting with family a little bit more based on imposed isolation, and then also connection with their neighbourhood, and I guess possibly feeling an enhancement of community engagement. Now, Cassie, I'd mentioned that brands are sometimes want to, I guess, utilise the terminology of community in terms of retention of customers or an audience. So it's a two-pronged question, but I'm sort of posing it out there just to sort of round off the events as we get close to the end. It's around what's a good, I guess, method of community consultation that you've seen, and then also, I guess, a bit of a remark on, I guess, our perceptions of how to categorise community in these recent times, local.
I think this one is more on Kathy's side of the fence, but from our perspective, I think, as I said before, if anything, the COVID situation has highlighted to, I think, everyone how important genuine connections are. And now that we've had that time to kind of isolate and reset, and we can come back to a more normal life with some different priorities around who we want to have that connection with, and how to establish those connections again. But I think in terms of the community angle, Kathy, it's probably more your side of things.
Yeah, so it is one of the challenging pieces, but the organisations, the charities and not-for-profit organisations that we're working with and partnering with in our granting are very well connected with the communities and the beneficiaries of whatever program they're providing, whether it's trying to support young people to into work, because often they're not having the skills to actually be able to get to an interview. So it's supporting social enterprises, and it's those organisations and our program managers being very, very across our relevant impact areas and understanding what the services on the ground need to be, and trying different solutions than are currently operating. So having a client focus operating model, and often it's breaking the tendency to work in silos across different service delivery organisations, which means it's very disjointed for people to try and break through and get solutions. Every program operates slightly differently, and the issues are very individual. So a lot of them need to be very individually targeted, and there's a lot of place-based activities that are going on, because obviously the different locations also creates differences in how the programs and that community and individual engagement needs to happen. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer. And that's why we're looking for we have to engage and look to the organisations who have the right connections and different ways of trying to solve multiple problems. It's not the answer, really. It's a very complex situation.
Look, it's difficult to put the finger on it, but as we end, look, I'd love just a closing remark, whether we're talking about from that local community perspective, or Cassie, if you wanted to, I guess, remark on how new I guess categorizations of community. But how do you both feel, based on what's been happening of late, how do you feel we'll rethink our perspective or the definition of community from two different viewpoints?
I think from coming out of the kind of work from home and school from home, I think it's about accepting and embracing a more flexible work environment. I think a lot of companies were always very against having a work from home arrangement, and I think being forced into having people working from home has probably shown them that it can be done. And I think allowing that flexibility in working, might give families more chance to connect. And I think we've seen, a lot of, and not to be too kind of sexist here, but a lot of fathers who have had to work from home enjoying that time to pick the kids up from school or homeschool them, as has been the case in the past couple of weeks, and perhaps embracing more of that flexible work to get that kind of work-life balance back in check for a lot of people who I think we can all agree that, life can get too busy and too demanding. And I think having this time to reset might be one positive that comes out of obviously a very a kind of terrible pandemic. But if we can take a positive out of it, it might be about having that family connection being a more prioritised thing that we do in our homes.
Yeah, certainly. It's undeniably one of the greatest periods of reflection, I guess, for us to sort of reevaluate all those multiple facets of our life. And Kathy, regarding the definition of community, etc., whether internally or your own views, I'm just keen to hear what you think as we sort of veer towards the end. As
we wrap up, yeah. Look, I think there's actually a piece where we've become a better, broader community. There's been clear demonstrations of love, engagement and support across diverse groups, and even the delivery of services and the various stimulus packages that have been produced, and the collaboration even in the research sector around working towards treatments. It creates a whole different way of working that I think has been forced upon us, and we need to reflect on the things that we'd like to keep most, and what are the things that have worked that have actually made progress more possible in very short time frames. And there's quite a few examples of that, which we don't really have time to talk about, but I think individually and organisationally, there's lots of things that we can take from this that have already built a better, more socially cohesive environment, and opportunities for conversations that haven't been really been able to be put on the table before. So I think that's a bit of progress there.
Look, I hate to end it. We need to end at some point, I guess, and we don't want to labour the point. I think that it is important to note that we're in the midst of it now. So there will also be future opportunities where we revisit this type of topic specifically, and then reevaluate again. So the intention of this type of discussion and this type of topic is to address it now because it's very societally relevant and current, and then obviously come back with a period of greater reflection and context a little later. We're all trying to understand what's going on in our lives, and that's why we engage with yourselves and to help us make some sense of it as well. So look, for everyone who's attended today, I do thank you so much for coming along. Thank you very much to Dr. Kathy Avent and to Dr. Cassie Hayward. I really appreciate your time, so thank you very much.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Garry. Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you, and thanks for bearing with us. I know the tech difficulties got us, but you know what? It's you roll with the punches and you just forge on, and we got there in the end. So for everyone who has joined, we will publish this event out on YouTube. I'll clean it up a little bit with the sound, and then obviously inject the content. Do check out the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation on Twitter and various social media channels, as well as obviously the Melbourne School of Psychological Sciences. We're going to continue on with the Understanding 2020 event stream with the School of Psych Sciences in 2 weeks' time, and we'll have a focus on mindfulness. So for now, I'm Garry Williams. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm part of Melbourne Connect, that innovation precinct to be launching at the end of this year. You can find out more about it online at melbconnect.com.au. But for now, thank you all so much, and all the best with the rest of your day.